so that you can save money. Not only just save it, but that money that's sitting there is accumulating interest. Interest is what we like because that's extra money that we're earning on top of the amount that we're saving. Okay. The first kind of interest that we'll talk about is simple interest. Okay, and so there are two terms that you should be familiar with. First, principal. That's simply the amount of money deposited or borrowed, depending on what the context is. So you could be earning interest, bless you, you could be earning interest if you're putting money into an account, or maybe you get a loan that has interest attached to it. Okay, so it works both ways. Interest is the amount of money that we get paid for investing money or amount we owe in addition to a loan. Okay, and we're going to do much more complicated interest scenarios besides just simple interest. Okay, but this is a good way to start. So, for simple interest, interest is calculated simply on the principal. Okay? And that means that essentially you start with an amount of money, let's say $5,000, and you put that into an account, and you get interest on just that amount over time. The other option is that, and this will be what we do next week, so after a year, you have a new balance, and then that new balance gets interest on it. Yes?
I don't have that page in my packet.
That's awesome.
Do you have any other copies?
Yeah. Here. I'm going to give you my page. Okay. All right, so moving on. Calculating simple interest. You've probably seen this formula, maybe even in middle school, but it's just interest equals principal times rate times time. Have you guys seen that formula before? I equals PRT? No? Okay, well now you've seen it. Okay, it's pretty easy to work with, and it should make some sense. So for example, if I start with a $5,000 principal and I get 10%, which is ridiculous, but let's say I got 10% every year, 5,000 times 10%, that's $500, right? So after 1 year, I have $500 of interest on top of the 5,000 I put in there. Does that make sense? Okay, and then 2 years go by, I have another $500. So now we're up to 6. Okay, so let's look at this first example. This one's the other way around though. So here a student takes out a loan and the interest rate is 7.8% per year. So we want to know, all right, how much interest are we going to have to pay if we're doing this loan for 4 years? Okay, so what's the principal amount? What's P? 5,000. What's the rate of the loan? So that gets translated to 0.078. And the time here is 4 years. So help me out. What is that going to be? Come on, folks. YouTube's waiting. 1,560? Okay. So that's how much interest you have to pay on top of the $5,000 you got to pay back. Does that make sense? Okay. How much is on the interest if the loan is for just 100 days? Okay. So same setup. $5,000. Still 0.078 a year. But now this, we're not going to plug in 100 because that would be like 100 years. Does that make sense? We have to convert 100 days into years. Do you guys know how to do that? So it's 100 out of 365. I'm going to use that. Okay, so type that in. Were you guys reading ahead and saw the 360 down there? Is that what you're saying? What do we get? Should be a lot less. 106, 85. Okay. Lesson learned right away. The longer you keep a loan, the more interest you have to pay back. So that's why it's always, whether you're getting a car loan or you actually take out a mortgage when you guys get older, the faster you pay it back, the less interest you pay over time. Yes?
What's that number under the 100?
365. Okay. And so here they have this banker's rule. Back in the day, before calculators and all these different things, you were just able to plug the numbers in and get your answers. They use 360 to help figure out the calculations. Okay, they don't do that anymore. All right. Any questions so far? Nothing as complicated as yesterday so far, right? Okay. What's that? This is harder than yesterday? Taxes yesterday. Okay. So the next thing is, now that we know how to find interest, we also should be able to figure out future value. Okay? Future value is a pretty simple concept. It's the principal plus the interest. Okay? And so if I just follow that formula, even though they give it to you, principal is P, right? Plus interest, we just figured out, is PRT. And so that's where the formula comes from. Okay? So principal plus principal times rate times time. A is going to represent the future amount or the future value. Future value. Okay? And I hope you remember some basic algebra because we're going to need a lot more next semester. But what can you factor out here? P. And what's left? 1. Don't forget the 1 plus RT, right? If you start with two terms, you got to have two terms in your factor. So P divided by P is 1, and then here you divide it out, you get RT. Okay, so either one of these formulas is perfectly fine to use. Let's go ahead and look now at example 2. Same scenario, but now we just want to know exactly how much total money needs to be paid back. So we do A, principal is 5,000, 1 plus the rate, which is 0.078, and then number of years, which is 4. Okay, type that in. And we should already know the answer. We already kind of figured it out on the previous page, right? Because the interest was 1560, so we should get 6560. Okay. So it's just important that you guys know the context of the problem. If they ask for future value, that means including the interest and the principal, how much are you paying back? If they just ask how much interest you're paying back, well, then it's not going to include the principal. It's just going to be that extra amount. Okay? Why don't you guys try B on your own real quick? All right. What are we getting? 4,000. So we're paying less than what we started with. That doesn't seem right.
Is it a lot?
I set it up like I did 5,000 times 1 plus 0.178 and then 9 over 12. Just 12 months of the year.
Like that?
Yeah.
And you got 4,000 something?
Yeah, I have this, so I probably did it wrong.
Oh, you guys are using your phones.
Yeah, come on.
All right. 5,000. 1 plus 0.078 times, you said 9 over 12, right? That seems a lot more reasonable, right? $5,292.50. Okay. Questions on that? Okay, cruising along. This is going to be an easy section. You guys are going to have time to get your homework done for the weekend probably in class. Okay? Except Jason doesn't do anything. Okay. So if you have any questions, ask him. He'll help you. Okay? All right. Example 3. So we want to keep things as simple as possible. Okay? Start with the formula. Plug in what they. So if we borrow $3,000, and this is a 4-year loan, 1 plus, they did not give me the rate. So this is what I know on the right-hand side. You guys see where that's coming from? I don't know the rate. I know it's a 4-year loan. I know I'm starting with, or I'm borrowing $3,000. How much do I pay back? What's the total value later on? $3,200. So that goes on the left-hand side. That's our future value. That's A. And now we solve. You have a couple of options to try to get R alone. What's one thing that we could do to get R by itself? Divide by what? I like that. Divide by 3,000. So now on this side, what does this reduce to? Let's get a fraction out of that. Okay, what's the fraction for that? I don't want to write repeating decimals, and we don't. This is very important. Do not round your answers in the process of doing steps. If you have to round, you round at the very end. Does that make sense? If you round like 2 or 3 times throughout, your answer at the end is not going to be accurate. Does that make sense? So never round until the very end of the problem. This reduces, you guys, it's not too hard. Yeah, 16/15ths, right? So 16/15ths equals 1 plus 4R. How do I solve now? Minus the 1, and then divide that by 4. So whatever that is, gives us our interest rate. So if we type in 16/15 minus 1, divide that answer by 4, what do we get? Well, now we can do the decimal. 0.016. Repeating. Okay? So this is more like 1.67%, about. Move the decimal over twice, it's 1.67 if you round up. Does that make sense? If you would have rounded at the beginning, your answer would be close here, okay? On MyMathLab, what's going to happen is if you get close, it's not going to count it, which is going to be frustrating, right? So make sure that number 1, you don't round until the end, and number 2, read the directions. It'll tell you round to 2 decimals, round to 3 decimals, or whatever you need to do. The last thing you want to do is put 1.667, and then it asked for 1 decimal, and you did everything right, and now you got to do a new problem because you didn't follow directions, okay? So just make sure that you pay attention to those details. All right, example 4. Why don't you guys set this one up and see if you can figure it out here. Another little algebra question. We're not figuring out the future value. We're working backwards to figure out how much money needs to be put into an account. So we want to find the principal. All right, someone walk me through what our first line of work or our setup should be. Jared, go ahead.
2,000 equals P.
Mm-hmm.
And then in parentheses, 1 plus the rate, which was 0.0425.
Mm-hmm.
And then 18 years.
Okay, so there's the setup. And now we just got to solve for P, right? So what can I do next? So like actually figure that part out, okay? What is that? Exactly?
Yeah.
1.765. Okay? And we're done, pretty much. Just one more thing. Divide. No one is totally confused with this algebra, right? I would hope not. So what's 2,000 divided by 1.765? 0.15?
Oh, 1,448.
So we'd round to the nearest cent. 1448. So yeah, nearest cent. Okay. Any questions on the two equations we've learned? Interest equation, future value equation, and then how to just plug stuff in and work backwards to figure out missing details. Okay. And the last thing is called a discounted loan, which is kind of weird if you think about it, because a discounted loan works backwards in the sense that you pay your interest right away as opposed to paying it over time. So what they'll do is deduct the interest from your loan amount. So if I walk in and say I want to borrow $5,000, and they say, well, the interest is going to be $1,000, they're not going to give me $5,000. They're going to give me $4,000. Does that make sense? So it's kind of weird, but discount is really just the interest, okay? And the loan amount, if it's a discounted loan, you subtract the interest. That's the only difference. Okay? So let's look at example 5. You borrow $5,000, 12% discounted loan for a period of 18 months. Let's go ahead and find the discount, which is really the interest, first. So that's just what? What's the principal? 5,000. Rate is 0.12, right? 12% is 0.12. And now 18 months, you could probably see that that's 1 year and 6 months, or 1.5 years, right? Or if you want, you could leave it as 18 over 12. That's how you get the 1.5. But make sure you convert it to years. And when we do that, what do we get? 900. Okay. So we want a $5,000 loan. The interest is going to be $900. So what they'll do now is subtract that from the amount that we're requesting. Okay? So that's $5,000 minus the 900. Make sense? Okay. The final question would be, let's say this was not a simple interest loan, and we actually just requested $4,100, and $5,000 is what we end up paying later on, right? So now what we would do is say interest equals PRT. You could also use the other equation, but we still have $900 in interest. And now my principal is going to be $4,100 instead of $5,000. The rate is still 0.12. Oh, wait a minute. It's not 0.12. That's what we're trying to find. We don't know what the new rate would be, but it's still 1.5 years. Okay? So this is going the other direction. If I request $4,100 and end up paying $5,000, what would the rate be? Well, that's pretty straightforward. Multiply these out and then divide, right? So 4,100 times 1.5, whatever that is, do 900 divided by that, and we should get our answer. Which is 0.14. 1463. So maybe let's do about 0.15, which is about 15% then, depending on how they want the answer. Okay? Questions? Great.